to take over the to present our tonight's speaker, since the director of the Archaeological Research Unit will be the speaker. He will, I will be the one monitoring the discussion today and presenting our speakers. The lecture is by both Athanasios Vionis and Giorgos Papantoniou. So I will say a few words about both our speakers before I give the microphone to them. Please, everybody, remember to turn off your microphones. Also, be aware that the lecture is being recorded, so you have to give your authorization. The recording has just started. And once the lecture has finished, then you can ask questions either by raising your hand or by writing the question in the chat, and I will read the question, and then Athanasios or Giorgos will read this, will respond. So let me start saying that great pleasure to present both Athanasios and Giorgos. I will start with Athanasios, who is Associate Professor in Byzantine Archaeology and Art at the Department of History and Archaeology of the University of Cyprus and the Director of the Archaeological Research Unit of the University of Cyprus. He completed his undergraduate studies in ancient history and archaeology at the University of Durham in the UK and continued with his doctoral research at the University of Leiden in the Netherlands, where he received his doctoral title in medieval and post-medieval archaeology in 2005. He also undertook postdoctoral research at the Catholic University of Leuven in Flanders, Belgium, before he moved to the University of Cyprus to take up his position as lecturer in 2009. Athanasios' research focuses on landscape archaeology and archaeological survey, settled and sacred landscapes, GIS applications in archaeology and the use of space, pottery production, circulation, use, food preferences, and everyday life in the Byzantine and early modern eras. He has published more than 60 papers in journals, edited volumes, and conference proceedings on topics related to his research interests, a monograph on the medieval and post-medieval insular Aegean with Leiden University Press, and has co-edited 4 open access peer-reviewed volumes. He is a member of the editorial advisory board of the Journal of Greek Archaeology and has been acting as remote reviewer for research grant proposals submitted for funding to the National Research Foundations of Israel, Belgium, Canada, and the United States. In 2010, Athanasios established the Artifact and Landscape Studies Laboratory, functioning as an operating platform of the Archaeological Research Unit, which he has been coordinating since then. He has collaborated with the universities of Leiden, Leuven, Newcastle, and Edinburgh in the framework of archaeological projects in Greece and Turkey, and is currently coordinating 4 research programs hosted at the ARU and funded by the Cyprus Research and Innovation Foundation and the University of Cyprus. His main archaeological field project, Settled and Sacred Landscapes of Cyprus, is an ongoing intensive survey program in the Xeros River Valley in the Larnaca district, initiated in 2014 and coordinated in collaboration with Giorgos Papantoniou and Doria Nicolaou. Now we turn to Giorgos. Giorgos Papantoniou was appointed just recently to the position of Assistant Professor in Ancient Visual and Material Culture at the Department of Classics of Trinity College Dublin, University of Dublin in Ireland. This just happened in August 2020, and I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate him and to wish him all the best of luck. He completed his undergraduate studies in history and archaeology at our own university, so I was one of his professors, so that's why I'm so happy with all his progress, and carried out his doctoral research at Trinity College Dublin. Giorgos undertook postdoctoral research at Trinity College Dublin, having received an Irish Research Council postdoctoral fellowship, followed by a Marie Curie postdoctoral fellowship for the project entitled Unlocking Sacred Landscapes. From 2015 to 2018, he held a research fellowship within the research training group Archaeology of Pre-Modern Economies of the Universities of Bonn and Cologne, funded by the German Research Foundation. He was a senior researcher at the University of Cyprus between 2018 to 2020 in the framework of an excellence research grant from the Cyprus Research and Innovation Foundation for the project Unlocking the Sacred Landscapes of Cyprus, coordinated jointly with Athanasios. Giorgos has also worked as an archaeologist at the Cyprus Department of Antiquities and as a researcher and visiting lecturer at the University of Cyprus, University of Sassari, and the Open University of Cyprus. Giorgos Papantoniou is specializing in Mediterranean archaeology and material culture history, bringing together landscape, archaeological, textual, iconographic, and anthropological evidence. He works on the interaction of social power and the archaeology of religion from Bronze Age to late antiquity, while he's currently developing an interest on cultural heritage, reception, and ethnographic analysis. He has been co-directing the aforementioned project in the Xeros Valley with Athanasios and Doria, while coordinating the international research network Unlocking Sacred Landscapes, based on a formal agreement of collaboration between Trinity College Dublin and the University of Cyprus. Giorgos published his monograph on religion and social transformations in Cyprus with Brill in 2012. He has edited or co-edited 5 volumes and has published more than 50 papers in journals, edited volumes, and conference proceedings on topics related to ancient religion, ritual, reception, landscapes, material, and visual culture. Their joint presentation tonight is titled Living Popular Religion, Social Distancing, and an Opportunity for Ethnoarchaeology, the Christian Cult of the Epitaphios in a Pandemic Crisis. It will be delivered by Athanasios, and then the questions will be jointly answered by Athanasios or Giorgos. So, Athanasios, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lina. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Thank you, Lina, for also taking up the role, once again, of the coordinator of this evening's lecture. It feels awkward to be in this position, but here we go. This is my first Zoom public lecture, and I hope everything goes well. I have to say before we start that this is a jointly written presentation, a jointly written paper with Giorgos. It was actually his idea on Good Friday of April 18th this year, when we observed this phenomenon that you will all hear about. And I have to also admit that it was we thoroughly enjoyed this venture. At that time, myself, I had just submitted an article, a chapter on the Byzantine pottery of Boeotia, and I have to say that this was far more interesting for various reasons and far more meaningful for other reasons. So, Giorgos Kalispera. Giorgos is with us remotely from another computer.
Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for joining.
And as Lina said, we will both be here for the discussion. So here we start. Our presentation, as I just mentioned, this evening, written by Giorgos Papantoniou and myself during the general lockdown in Cyprus last April, explores the materiality of the Orthodox Christian cult of the Epitaphios held on Good Friday of April 2020, when due to the COVID-19 pandemic, social distancing and isolation were deemed as the most effective means of preventing societies from exposure to the virus. Here is as an outline of the different chapters that this presentation tonight is divided, and you can see the title of each chapter running along the green line at the bottom of each slide. So this presentation first defines the terms of ritual and cult in a funerary context. It explores the historicity and paraphernalia of the Epitaphios cult since Byzantine times. Following, we discuss the context of living and lived religion, the archaeology of pandemics, and the effect of major crises on institutional, religious, and domestic ritual cults. And we explore Greek Orthodox people's response to the limitations imposed on practicing this specific communal cult publicly in churches, who reacted to this restriction in a quite inventive way by constructing homemade epitaphi. The ultimate aim is to examine the materiality of the homemade epitaphi in the context of popular religion, evaluating how an event may divert the forces of the longue durée into a different channel, and how ethnographic analogies may be useful for our understanding of ancient or pre-modern ritual and cult. A thorough and contextual ethnographic analogy explored in this lecture benefits archaeological interpretation regarding spirituality and the development of new rituals during periods of crisis in general and during pandemics in particular. What follows later manifests how official and popular religions may interact and merge, transferring specific ritual practices from public to private space. Finally, our case study showcases how, in a contemporary digital world, social media can play a central role in the dissemination of new trends of popular culture and spirituality. By focusing on the concepts of materiality and popular religion in this presentation, we address the Greek Orthodox cult of the Epitaphios in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. The Epitaphios, meaning upon the tomb in Greek, nowadays refers to arched or dome pier, a ciborium-like wooden structure, like the one you see on this on the slide to the left, symbolizing the Holy Sepulchre, the tomb of Christ, within or upon which an embroidered cloth, like the one you see on the right, depicting the Lamentation, or a wooden icon featuring the image of the dead Christ, is deposited on Good Friday. Before proceeding with placing the Epitaphios in its historical and religious contexts, it is important that we define the terms ritual and cult. Ritual remains a key issue in the creation and maintenance of forms of both personal and communal identities. Ritual is often a facet of religion, but certainly not its whole, while in many instances it can also be secular, that is, non-religious in nature, like this PhD Viva ceremony at the University of Leiden, which is a real religious as well as secular ritual. The official church had developed since very early in its history funerary rituals that involved various related theatrical acts. Mourning was one of these acts, playing a central role in these religious rituals. Lamentation and mourning, as evidenced in visual culture, textual sources, and church tradition, refer not only to saintly figures, but also to family members, women, and priests, like those professional mourners from Mani. Funerary cult, on the other hand, refers to activities destined to honor the memory of the deceased. The cult of the dead, for example, obviously involved the ritual offering of different elements: food, incense, and prayer. The burning of incense has been an offering to God and to the deceased. In the Christian tradition, it has links to liturgy and funerary rituals, providing the dead with spiritual benefit and accompanying prayers to their memory, such as the example of this woman from Romania burning incense in front of graves on a Holy Thursday. Finally, prayers constituted an integral part of both funerary rituals and the cult of the dead, when the mourners and the church prayed for the dead and named the departed in their prayers, while family members brought offerings to the church to be consecrated during the commemoration cult, as you can see on the example to the left, with the so-called koliva, the memorial wheat in the memory of the deceased. As illustrated below, religious performances related to the reenactment and veneration of the Epitaphios reflect elements of both ritual and cult. In the Greek Orthodox tradition, no other religious commemoration or feast is more important. Thus, the Epitaphios is heavily laden with symbolism. The Epitaphios performance and the story of Christ's Passion are associated with sophisticated theological messages and mimetic rituals, such as the Eucharist and the Great Entrance, that is, the symbolic reiteration of Christ's burial procession, referring to penitential rites, salvation, and the symbolic victory of life over death. While the term Epitaphios nowadays refers to the embroidered cloth, such as the one you see on the left, bearing the image of the dead Christ and to his representational portable tomb, scholars have argued that the same veil initially functioned as a liturgical one, known as Aër, decorated with the sacrificed lamb to cover the holy gifts of the Eucharist. Scholars place the transformation of the cloth's use from being liturgical to serving a narrative historical purpose used in the commemorative ritual and procession of the Epitaphios towards the end of the 14th century. Saint Simeon of Thessaloniki, towards the late 14th, early 15th century, is the first to mention the term Epitaphios to refer to the Aër. We can visualize this alteration through the depiction of the Epitaphios Thrinos, that is, the weeping of the Virgin for her son, instead of the sacrificed lamb, on the cloth, which includes the dead body of Christ in the burial position. This transformation, together with the incorporation of the Epitaphios ritual performance on Good Friday, suggested to have developed fully outside monasteries in the 16th century, demonstrates the powerful association of the Epitaphios reenactment with life-giving Christ and the Eucharist. The Benaki Museum Epitaphios, which you see on the slide from the Valadoros collection, dated to the early 14th century, provides direct evidence for the transformation in the use of such ecclesiastical vestments. Although its iconography clearly points to their liturgical role, the depiction of the dead Christ, flanked by angels and the symbols of the evangelists on its four corners, is also compatible with its later narrative historical use. The larger number of surviving epitaphi from later centuries indicate that the depiction of the Epitaphios Thrinos, testifying to the establishment of the historical character of this ecclesiastical vestment, crystallized after the middle 15th century. We surmise that the initial active role of the textile Aër Epitaphios in the liturgy of the Eucharist must have been inscribed deeply in the mentalities and memories of the faithful as a symbolic regeneration of life. It is crucial to note that in the domain of living religion, the bodily senses, such as sight, touch, sound, smell, play a key role in understanding the nature of religious experience, and it is here that the intersection between religious beliefs and ritual action can be studied. In the context of the Epitaphios cult, sensory and experiential engagement would range from the viewing of Christ's body, the proskinesis, that is bowing before an image, icon to venerate or kiss, the touching of the portable dome pier or tomb, the hearing of processional prayers and Mary's choral lamentation, and the smell of incense and of decorative garlands and spring flowers. Interestingly, recent conservation work on the early 14th century Benaki Museum Epitaphios has revealed evidence for the veneration of this liturgical textile by the faithful, evident in its wear on its lower long side, here, because of touching and kissing, perhaps when it started being used for the Good Friday Epitaphios ritual procession from the 17th century onwards. And we acknowledge Anastasia and Dandaki here for this information. Obviously, when referring to the Epitaphios ritual, a series of related performances seem to originate from other relevant Byzantine religious and funerary rites, namely the procession of the Epitaphios, that is, the dome pier carrying the textile or wooden icon with the figure of the dead Christ, and the choral lamentation of the Virgin or the Epitaphios Thrinos. This is exactly the point where the concepts of reenactment, remembrance, and commemoration come to the fore. It is true that there is a long theological debate on the issue of mimesis, non-mimesis, enactment, and metamorphosis within the various aspects of the liturgy. We cannot ignore, however, that the reenactment of Christ's lamentation and the procession of the Epitaphios around the streets on Good Friday, such as the examples you see on the slide, with people holding lit hand candles and the sound of tolling bells, stages a commemoration and creates the space for memory and sanctification. The Epitaphios Thrinos, performed as part of the liturgy on Good Friday, and speaking of the weeping mother of Christ, resembled as the moon, and her son Jesus, the Son, who descended to Hades, turns in folk culture into a personified embodiment of sorrow for the death of Christ and or recently deceased members of the community. To give you some examples, following the evening service of the crucifixion on Holy Thursday, women on the island of Paros, and this is where the image to the left comes from, gather under the cross and recite Myrologia, folk poetic lamentations, cursing Judas and the Jews, while on the island of Carpathos, as you can see on the example to the right, women lament their own deceased in front of the Epitaphios after the Good Friday service. Similar Myrologia by women reciting the Virgin's lament and tearing their hair over an image of Christ made for the occasion have also been recorded in the modern Greek folk song tradition of Cyprus and East Crete, which may date back to the 15th century. Various ritual reenactments during Holy Week, from the crucifixion to the preparation of the body for burial, the lamentation, the adornment, and the procession of the Epitaphios, are performed on a stage surrounded by painted figurative images, narrating scenes of Christ's passion, enacting divine presence, and interacting with the faithful. Painted images and narrative scenes, in our case, wall frescoes and portable icons, mediate divine according to Christian theology, and provide lessons for the faithful who view through Christ's passion their own misfortunes and daily struggles according to Sharon Gerstel. The scene of the Epitaphios Strinos with the mourning Mother of God and the Entombment of Christ is found in numerous church frescoes across the Orthodox Christian East and comprise such models of inspiration for the faithful. And the example you see here on this slide is a very characteristic one. It's my favorite. It's a very strong image showing with the sorrow lived by the Mother of God and the disciples is really reflected on their facial expression, and through the movement of their garments, there is this tensity, this tension reflected in the whole composition. And there are many examples such as this one. Additionally, contemporary folk static reenactments of key episodes of Jesus' life and passion on Good Friday during the procession of the Epitaphios in the Catholic West and in parts of the Orthodox East offer the faithful emotional engagement and embodied participation. Representations of Christ and other saintly figures in religious iconography functioned also as agents of metaphorical healing, even if recent developments and the expanding field of the science of neurotheology or spiritual neuroscience suggest that the brain responds in specific ways to meditative and contemplative healing practices. Icons and the visual representation of the divine exercised a powerful role simply because they were meant as an essential part of worship, both in church, fixed on the walls and the church screen or carried in ritual processions, and at home, producing emotions and promoting metaphorical healing. This is just an example of such a reenactment in the Orthodox East. All these images come from the island of Paros, where during the Epitaphios procession on Good Friday, people, especially young people, school children, take part in this kind of reenactments, such as those you see on the example, right by the street where the Epitaphios procession passes from, just like scenes like the crucifixion, the descent from the cross, the lamentation are very typical, and it's a very interesting phenomenon in that it provides a stronger evidence for what we are arguing in this presentation actually. But I will leave this practice from Paros and perhaps other places for our discussion at the end. I would just like to go through a few of my slides just to give you a taste of what happens in this very important ritual procession on Good Friday, and what accompanies actually the procession of the Epitaphios on the street. Images like reenacted images, static images like the entry into Jerusalem. As you can see here, I have blurred the faces of the participants, of the actors, let's say, for obvious reasons. Most of them are underage. The washing of the feet, they're all from the Passion cycle. The Last Supper, praying in Gethsemane, they look all very professionally executed. Pontius Pilate, the flagellation of Christ, carrying of the cross, and finally the crucifixion on the Golgotha and the lamentation, which you saw earlier, and the entombment of Christ, and the resurrection, of course. There's a happy end to all this. Magda Onefals-Richter recorded Greek customs and mores in Cyprus with comments on natural history, local economy, and development under British colonial rule. Although the text is unsurprisingly for the time imbued with a colonialist perspective, her work was impressively accurate, detailed, and one of the first attempts to record systematically the popular culture of Cyprus. Regarding the cult of the Epitaphios, she informs us, and I quote, "On Good Friday, the important event is not, as with us, the morning mass. Here it is celebrated in the evening, after sunset, with vigil candles and morning torches, in a general expression of grief. Then they carry the Epitaphios or bier through the streets. The biggest and richest churches have for this purpose an especially full-length wax figure or a wooden statue of Christ with or without any clothing. On a portable stretcher there is a bed made of lace, flowers, and twigs. The richest and most prominent families offer for this reason the finest fabrics and the most beautiful of their flowers. If there is an available canopy of wood or reed, they decorate it with splendor, weaving its stems with flowers, twigs, and garlands. If there is no icon of Christ, then they put the cross in its place. Some of these epitaphia or biers are works of art with beautiful flower compositions, which can be compared with those of the artist gardeners of big European cities. First, in front of this flower bed of our Savior, a Holy Mass and the Vesper of Good Friday are held, and then the procession is carried through the streets and the districts of the town, accompanied by chanting priests." End of quote. We have not been able to identify wax figures or wooden statues of Christ instead of the embroidered cloth and the painted icon in Cyprus, such as the one that you see on the slide from the Giorgos Museum. But wooden icons with the painted figure of that Christ on the island and similar items and practices in Greece and the Aegean Islands dating back to the post-Byzantine period could confirm Onefals Richter's observation. The ornamentation of the portable domed furniture of the Epitaphios is an important annual communal event and a task undertaken traditionally by women and children, usually unmarried girls, while singing the Virgin's Lament. On Good Friday morning, after the participants have collected spring garden and wildflowers and twigs from different neighborhoods and the countryside, they decorate the Epitaphios as a group activity by weaving garlands of violets, daisies, and lemon blossom. Although the selection of the flowers can be varied upon availability, there is a preference for myrtle, laurel, and rosemary, all connected with the dead in ancient Greek and folk culture, violets, daisies, carnations, roses, lilacs, and gypsophila. The choice of colors is not, however, coincidental. According to church and folk tradition, beyond the green of myrtle, laurel, and rosemary, other colors bear hidden symbolisms related to charmolipi, transformative grief, or grief combined with the hope for regeneration for purple, sacrifice for red, hope and purity for white. And the pictures here are very characteristic. In many parts of Greece and Cyprus, the faithful would normally go around their village and neighboring communities on Good Friday before the evening procession in order to venerate as many epitaphi and crawl under them to ask for forgiveness and blessing and secure health in the coming year. The custom is an informal, non-institutional layer, bringing to the forefront folk and personal agencies related to the materiality of the cult. The folk tradition of crawling under the Epitaphios is an example of our inability to distinguish sometimes between religious and medical healing in Orthodox Christianity. The 6th century poet Romanos the Melodist, for example, speaks of physical healing and salvation in his Good Friday dialogue between the Virgin and Christ, with the elements of the Passion becoming salvific agents, restoring humanity to health, obviously in a symbolic manner, as Derek Kruger has noted. And here you see an example of this practice of crawling under the Epitaphios before the Good Friday evening Mass. The picture to the left is of particular interest. It is from Carpathos, like the one I showed you earlier. You can see on the example of this Epitaphios the pictures of the deceased of a particular family and notes with mirologia and verses, lamentation verses written on them related to the to relatives, recently deceased relatives of the people attending the church services, they are attached on the epitaphios representing the tomb of Christ itself. As mentioned above, the procession of the Epitaphios around the streets take place during the Good Friday evening service, and all the congregants participate by following behind the cross, the icon of Mary covered with a purple or black cloth, the Epitaphios itself, the priests, and the myrophores, the myrrh-bearing mourning women. If there is more than one parish church in the region, each Epitaphios follows a different path, but they meet at some point in a central location, like this example from Paros. We have also witnessed that during the procession, the Epitaphios would occasionally visit the houses of the poor and the sick, or those with disabilities, an act perceived as a special annual blessing. After the return of the congregation to the church from the Epitaphios procession around the streets, the faithful would venerate it once again. Everyone would go home after the Good Friday service with a flower or petals from the Epitaphios. People would keep those petals and flowers in their houses and would use them as powerful amulets or medicines displayed on their iconostasis, the homemade icon stand, throughout the year, burnt in an incense burner or boiled and consumed with a little charcoal water. Moments of crisis and disaster play a significant role in heritage formation. Religion may play a significant role in consolidating identity and providing space for reflection and dialogue during times of crisis and stress. This brings us to an ongoing debate into which we question ourselves whether we can interpret the past in the light of the present because of inference and similarities. Such an approach led to a number of pitfalls in archaeology, especially in prehistory, by drawing parallels with the customs and morals of modern people. In the context of the Christian era, if we understand the relationships implied by similarity, then ethnographic analogy may be helpful. Thus, even moving beyond the Christian periods, ethnographic analogy may provide ways of thinking in archaeology rather than answering questions. By drawing analogies, archaeologists need to consider that we tack from immediate, small-scale individual actions, while at the same time, we may tack between the individual and the group, or between the site and the region. This forces us to be flexible and compensate for variation when we, as archaeologists, employ ethnographic analogy. Ethnoarchaeology is an exciting and dynamic area of study that may provide new insights into cognitive and behavioral aspects, particularly related to the archaeologies of religion, crisis, and disease. For example, when exploring archaeological, textual, and ethnographic evidence for sacred travel and movement, we note that individual health crises and epidemics led to the emergence of built or natural healing pilgrimage places such as sanctuaries, temples, churches, holy wells and springs, therapeutic clays, sacred trees, and caves. Healing and pilgrimage sites were places that received the dedication of votive limbs in antiquity or tamata in a Christian context. These votive offerings offer us a way to think about religions, personally in some instances, outside the cultic center. Thus, we move from the anonymous, repetitive, material things to a broader landscape network constituted by materiality and crossing from the earthly and the pedestrian to the divine. While there is extensive archaeological research on disease in the ancient world, its attribution to various forms of causation and ritual healing, the examination of religious responses, and the emergence of new popular practices and in periods of pandemic crisis under the synergy of the related disciplines of archaeology and ethnography remain a desideratum. There is important published anthropological and archaeological research on the role of ritual in precipitating social change during critical historical junctures as conservative bulwark or as a force of reaction. Moving from personal calamities to large-scale crises and pandemics during the Christian era, we can identify comparable notable changes in the materialities and practices of religion in a number of other cases. The so-called Justinianic plague of the 540s and the Black Death in the late 1340s, for example, not only affected demography and economic life negatively, but also gave rise to a new piety and to the popularity of plague saints and other bizarre practices such as magic. The Justinianic plague led the faithful to seek cure from healing saints in monasteries through rituals of incubation, similar perhaps to those of the sanctuaries of Asclepios in the past, while the cult of Mary, the one who brought victory against both visible and invisible enemies, was promoted at Constantinople by terrified populations in the 540s. The bubonic plague promoted the cult of certain saints related to the protection of the faithful against pandemics, especially during the second half of the 14th century. In medieval handaks, present-day Heraklion in Crete, and elsewhere, for example, textual sources confirm the foundation of a notable number of new churches, like the one you see on the slide to the right, dedicated to Saint Athanasios, the Patriarch of Alexandria, since the middle 14th century. Obviously, the cult of this saint was intensified during and after the Black Death, but could be connected with the healing qualities of Athanasios, perhaps as a result of the meaning of his name, Athanasios for Athanatos, or immortal in Greek. We are aware of the debates on the validity of ethnographic analogy as an archaeological source of information in contemporary theoretical and methodological discussions. Thus, we move towards a different direction in comparison to the plethora of contemporary reflections on earlier plagues as somehow having wisdom to offer us. Instead, we argued that there is a significant opportunity for us, historians and archaeologists, to learn from the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic rather than the opposite, evaluating how epidemics may lead to cultural change or innovation when studying the past. Rather than fine-tuning definitions and interpretative paradigms, we believe that it is much more fruitful to see ethnographic analogy as a particular lens through which to study the archaeology of pandemics and disease and their effect on the emergence of new popular ritual practices and cults. Instead of drawing formal analogies based on the notion that situations are similar, we may consider relational analogies resting on cultural or natural connection or continuity and behavioral patterns between contexts of the present and the past. We believe that the archaeology of pandemics and disease offers the basis of such an approach for ethnographic analogies. As COVID-19 continues to cause further suffering globally, studies by historians with research expertise on previous pandemics, such as the Justinianic plague, the Black Death in the 14th century, and the Third Plague pandemic, are currently becoming very popular. With regard to COVID-19, archaeologists have started projects on Twitter, for example, such as the one to the left, to capture a visual record of the pandemic where signs, marks, and graffiti of social distancing, isolation, and lockdown are collected on the one hand, and creativity and hope are recorded on the other. The pandemic has also affected world religions at various levels, and the Journal for the Study of Religion, Nature and Culture is currently reviewing proposals exploring the entanglements of religion, COVID-19, and socio-ecological or biocultural systems. As the discussion has made clear so far, any contextualization of the symbolism, religious ritual aspects, and popular traditions of the Epitaphios would fail to capture the essence and depth of this performative cult without considering its importance in the spiritual life of people, both on the personal and on a community level. COVID-19 and the subsequent legally enforced social distancing and isolation in Greece and Cyprus, as indeed in other countries worldwide, has operated as a practical barrier for people to express the spirituality connected to this popular and important cult in the Greek Orthodox world. As we have witnessed in the mass on social media over the months of lockdown in Greece and Cyprus, a minor portion of Greek Orthodox Christians reacted negatively to the closure of churches, while others have reacted in more spiritual or inventive ways. And here's an example. A priest from Kozani in Greece comprises a representative example. After he led the worshippers into the church during the service of Good Friday morning, the police intervened, as was expected. On April 18th, Sky TV in Greece posted on its website that in reaction, the undaunted priest from Kozani loaded the portable domed epitaphio's of his parish onto his vehicle, and this is an image of this event, and drove around the town, thus creating a different form of procession during the evening. Meanwhile, it was with great interest that on the morning of Good Friday, April 17th, we witnessed an astonishing and inventive reaction to the lockdown. People started making their own epitaphy at home and posted photographs and comments on social media. The first homemade sample we noticed, posted by our friend Ioanna Hachikosti, the one to the left on the slide, immediately attracted our attention, while an initial Facebook and Google search rapidly brought us, on the same day, to many more examples in different parts of Greece and Cyprus, two of those you can see in the middle and to the right of the slide. Other websites and videos have provided other related information, such as instructions about how to make your own epitaphios. The collection of evidence presented in this lecture provides rich detail obtained through the examination of online sources, social media, and interviews, in addition to published material. All the aforementioned sources have contributed to our qualitative rather than quantitative research. Undoubtedly, it is interesting to examine in more detail the materialities of these spontaneously homemade epitaphi. It is clear that people used whatever materials were available at home or in their surroundings, such as low tables, cartons, or wires to stem flowers and garlands, wooden, textile, or paper-printed icons depicting the dead Christ or the Epitaphios Thrinos, lace tablecloths, and flowers. People chose most of these materials randomly, while others got inspired from the social media and from school through their children's school activities, or followed instructions found on the web. The selection of flowers is similar to those on ordinary epitaphi and is also a matter of seasonal availability. Although in some cases people seem to have followed instructions provided on the internet, the majority of the faithful made their epitaphi spontaneously. As materiality relates to meaning, it is essential to observe the function of this object into the house, its display, and the symbolism behind it. Some people displayed it in a visible and prominent position in their living room, such as the example you see to the left. An interesting case we recorded was the example of a more elaborate epitaphios made with beads, which the owners later donated to the neighboring church after its home use, thus further sacralizing the object and extending its ritual life. It is the example to the left. Other examples included homemade epitaphi that were displayed outside the house for the neighbors to see, such as the example to the right from Larnaca, while there is also evidence for the procession of some of those around the house or in the neighborhood. It is not coincidental that even parishes compete between themselves on the quality of their epitaphios decoration every year. Thus, visibility and the material components of the adorned object become very important issues in both official church and private domestic cults. In this context, the homemade epitaphy acquired an active and immediate role in private liturgies or family ritual processions, providing the most representative examples of private ritual theatres enacting a sacred narrative, a role similar to that of the Byzantine Church liturgical texts. More interestingly, this new form of domestic cults relates to formal ecclesiastical encouragement, for example, by Hieronymus II, the Archbishop of Athens and all Greece, as you can see on the screenshot of this slide, or Kallinikos, Metropolitan of Paros and Naxos, and others. In all cases, church officials encouraged the faithful, through short interviews in the newspapers before and during lockdown, to reactivate the institution of the house church, katikon ecclesia, as we know it in early Christianity, while intensifying their prayers at home. Turning houses into places of hesychasm, tranquility, or quietism, that is, places of silent monastic prayers known since Byzantine times, was another call in the framework of the intensification of private prayer at home, as shown in the text of Archimandrite Zacharias of Essex, published on March 20th. Following informal web interviews with and based on publicized comments by the makers of these epitaphi, we can further interrogate the function and symbolism behind those newly constructed family and private objects that became the media of respect and veneration of Christ's Passion. Most people felt that something very important was missing from the Greek Orthodox Holy Week of 2020. Since they could not attend the services in church, they felt the need to bring this centuries-old cult into the domestic sphere, while others were inspired because of the intense feeling of the absence of piety, colors, and smells, as some of our interviewees reported. Thus, it becomes obvious that the preservation and maintenance of the material presence of the sacred in the world of time and space became of utmost importance, rendering it too complex to define whether the final homemade product was profane or sacred. Some of the faithful we interacted with used their homemade epitaphi as an inspiring opportunity to listen to the liturgical hymns live on television or the web, and to explain to their children what Good Friday symbolizes in Eastern Orthodoxy and what the ritual and cultic function of the Epitaphios is. While there is an educational or creative element behind this action, the driving force for most people seems to have been a missed spiritual need. Hymns and music in a broader sense certainly play a role in promoting the spirituality of the congregants, or the faithful, within as well as outside the church building. Music and verses, as in the case of Romanos the Melodist's hymn on the Passion of Christ, call the faithful to participate in Christ's sacrifice and to prepare joyfully their souls for Christ to dwell within, in expectation of the resurrection, as Derek Kruger has previously noted. For those following the Eastern Rite, church music is another connecting link with the lived Byzantine past. Thus, COVID-19 seems to have provided an additional opportunity for re-singing, rehearing, and re-experiencing their living past. People felt that in this manner they welcome Christ to their homes, as Christ is the omnipresent, o pandachou paron. In the COVID-19 era, they had to mourn for Jesus from the safety of their houses. In this way, they also felt that they were paying their respects to the long-established customs and traditions while passing them down to their children. The symbolic transfer of the Epitaphios from church to home, beyond its spiritual value of rebirth, life, and salvation, also relates to a sensual movement. People felt the need for a haptic and visual experience with the sacred relic of the Epitaphios, but also for the scent of the spring flowers, the burning incense, and the hearing of liturgical hymns. The human need for re-experiencing those feelings and senses make the connection with the Byzantine past stronger. Evoking memory is a vital element in this process. Hesychasm can be a formal or private spiritual exercise through which the faithful can establish communication with the divine or emotionally interact with the past and with past practices. The materiality of popular religion is not straightforward to identify, considering that it can also be a very personal spiritual matter and thus highly elusive and intangible. Materiality has been discussed in conjunction with objectification, namely the process by which people constitute themselves through things, and has been addressed by archaeology from several directions, including social technology, material culture as text, and embodiment. Technological style is not simply a means of adaptation, but as seen in our homemade epitaphy, certain sorts of cultural phenomena are also expressed in the style and materials of manufacture themselves. The consumption of style can be seen as conforming to social norms and beliefs, but at the same time as challenging power and authority, in our case, the terrifying and violent authority of COVID-19 itself. The material culture as text approach, based on the idea that archaeological evidence resembles a text, requiring interpretation that can be variously read by different individuals, emphasizes the non-arbitrary nature of material meanings, their non-discursive and often subconscious quality, their inherent polysemy, and their durability. Homemade epitaphy, like people, have agency, or at least they are given meaning within agency. The characteristics of homemade epitaphy are important, but what manifests their social power is their dialectic with people. The centrality of the individual in the production of homemade epitaphy remains crucial, but at the same time, we should note that we refer to individuals as actively engaged and involved within a religious and cultural system. Christianity, amongst other religions, has always been a lived religion, in church and at home, involving all bodily senses in engaging with holy powers in human daily lives, beyond the accurate understanding and acknowledgement of religious dogmas and church doctrines. As Morgan has noted, because embodiment and materiality comprise lived religion and therefore make sensation and feeling the medium of belief, we may regard aesthetics as a primary framework for the study of religion. Aesthetics in our case do not have to do with the perception of earthly or godly beauty. The term refers to the symbolic beauty of Christ and to all norms of sensation in participating in Jesus' passion. Since congregations and group prayer have been banned due to COVID-19, homemade epitaphy and the self-made images of the dead Christ deposited within them did not become objects of venerations, as would be the case with the church Epitaphios, but the means through which to embody the presence of God and deliver prayers for his intervention in the pandemic. These homemade objects, especially the epitaphy that remained at home after Easter, were never blessed by the church to function as media of veneration. Equivalent to Byzantine icons functioning as sacred material ciphers that connect individuals with the body and of the Christian community and produce a tangible effect, we need to reflect on the role of Epitaphios in regulating the relationship between the supernatural and the worshipper in phenomenological terms. The reality of the COVID-19 era presupposes the interruption of the normal congregational gatherings, thus broadcast liturgical services become the new norm, with a more relaxed and private initiative for embodiment and commemoration of the holy through the homemade epitaphios and the reenactment of his ritual at home always. In this framework, it is interesting to consider how old tools are used in new contexts. Television and radio have always been broadcasting liturgical services. The new conditions, however, resulted in total replacement of church by the mass media. In the period before COVID-19, those who could not attend the liturgy would alternatively turn the television or the radio on, even in occasions that they were not really living the ritual. Thus, the sound of the liturgy was a mere background. However, some did live or even perform the ritual. As mentioned above, in the case of Epitaphios, many people participated in the assembling and decorating of the bier. During lockdown due to COVID-19, they felt they had to do this at home. Thus, in a way, rituals of the past have provided instruction for the rituals of the future. A turn towards archaeology of spiritualities, as opposed to this as proposed in this presentation, acknowledges the importance of understanding sacred practices for human communities in a holistic way. This approach investigates embodiments and necessitates engaging with living religious communities whose expert knowledge, practices, and religious belief can assist scientific inquiries. Deciphering the relationship between material and non-material worlds in archaeological analysis and interpretation is indisputably most challenging when it comes to the study of religion. Hence, the often critical insights offered by ethnographic data and oral traditions, if used appropriately, acquire an important role alongside other kinds of archaeological inquiries. As illustrated in the case of the epitaphy, materiality relates with aesthetics and embodiment. The Epitaphios ritual is sensuous, materially-mediated, invocating memory and creating arenas for identity formation, maintenance, and contestation. The shift from public, church-sponsored rituals to domestic and homemade icons reaffirms these characteristics. At the same time, however, it implies how changes in the materiality of the Epitaphios precipitated transformations in other domains of experience, practice, and belief, expressed through new media as discussed above, both material and digital. The sundry materials employed for this improvised homemade epitaphy and the spontaneity related to their manufacture reveal the agency of things in a time of crisis and tell how this agency is remaking the epitaphy and their devotees. In this presentation, we have addressed the history and changing meanings of the Epitaphios, a highlight of the Greek Orthodox calendar as material culture, ritual experience, and liturgical tradition from the Byzantine era to the present pandemic crisis. Both at the level of official and popular religion, the Epitaphios played a fundamental role in memory work, rites of healing and regeneration, and in devotional practices that inculcated Greek Orthodox values. The believer's attachment to the drama of this religious celebration, embodied in the Epitaphios beer, has traditionally been lived as a shared experience of the Good Friday liturgy, with the attendant procession of the Epitaphios through the community. Via the archaeology of materialities, we have explored the ways that people may innovate in order to sustain certain ritual practices in periods of duress, and particularly during the ongoing pandemic crisis, which denied people access to church services. Therefore, people in Greece and Cyprus took control of the Epitaphios cult object on an individual level by manufacturing homemade icons. The examination of the homemade epitaphy demonstrates the depth of devotion and the importance of these objects during the pandemic, the resilience of the Greek Orthodox believers in Greece and Cyprus, and their ability to shape events to meet their religious and spiritual needs. We hope that we have managed to highlight the inherent materiality of the Epitaphios ritual, especially as it related to embodied sensual practices with aesthetically charged material culture. In the absence of the official traditional Epitaphios ritual and cult on Good Friday, due to the forced social distancing and isolation, the establishment of homemade epitaphy for some faithful was their only way to place-make in an anthropological no place. We argue that the cult of the Epitaphios, with its spiritual and full sensorial dimensions, and its reception during the COVID-19 pandemic, can help us understand how a crisis in the past may have led to the emergence of new popular practices and cults. As illustrated above regarding the effects of the bubonic plague during the late Middle Ages, the popularity of the cult of new or plague saints, and the rise of bizarre practices provide valid examples of changing or evolving religious traditions and popular culture. In addition, it is possible to understand how official and popular religions, or great and little traditions respectively, to use terms from Christianity and symbolic anthropology, interact and merge. Moving beyond the Christian tradition, we propose that similar ethnographic, anthropological, and ethnoarchaeological studies can be conducted with the ultimate aim of showcasing the potential of such research in drawing critical, formal, or relational analogies connected with crisis and the emergence of new popular ritual practices and cults. We believe that ethnographic relational analogies in particular are very helpful in this context of studying world religions. Homemade epitaphy clearly expressed materialization of individual religiosity in private space. While for the moment they may concern only individual movements, it was also possible to identify modes and patterns of distribution of this movement. In addition, it was interesting to observe the transfer of this practice from the ecclesiastical context to domestic spheres of life. In the digital era, social media play a central role in the dissemination of such initiatives. In particular, we have explored how the use of social media allowed the individual acts related to the Epitaphios cult to become communal. We aim to monitor this practice in the years to come in order to observe whether such spontaneous act can become a tradition of domestic cult in the future, demonstrating how an event can divert the forces of the longue durée into a different channel and create new trends of popular religion. Since the pandemic is still ongoing, unfortunately, we can only get the real sense of the long-term transformations of devotional practices centered on the epitaphy within the medium term, to use Brodelian concepts of time, in a decade or so, once the pandemic has passed and we have learned from it. However, COVID-19 could potentially transform rites related to Good Friday in many different realms. First, in the aesthetics and the materiality of Epitaphios, that is, the production of homemade icons of various forms discussed above. Secondly, in popular religion, for example, the veneration of the icons in a domestic context by a broader public, the establishment of specific domestic rituals, and in some instances, the dedication of these icons to the church, perhaps even in the form of votive offerings, tamata, and we saw such an example. Third, in its institutional modes of worship, for example, the inclusion of homemade epitaphy in the official institutional processions organized by the church, or even, as mentioned above, Church may officially encourage the faithful in periods of crisis or when there is necessity to reactivate the institution of the house church, turning houses into domestic shrines, using also television and other media to mediate the official ritual. And finally, in the religious market, for example, as other portable icons and even shrines are popular amongst Greek Orthodox families, the church or other sellers may start creating and selling such portable icons for the house. Having summarized our main points raised in this presentation, we would like to inform you that an extended version of our lecture has been accepted for publication with the journal Ethnoarchaeology in their delayed issue 2 of October in volume 12 of this year. Ethnoarchaeology can be found both in printed and digital form, and could be and should you be interested in reading the published version of our paper, you will be able to download it for free through your university library's portal after it appears very soon. Last but not least, we would like to extend our thanks to Christine Morris from Trinity College Dublin, Chrysovalandis Kyriakou and Savas Neokleos in Cyprus for reading and commenting on the first draft of our paper, as well as to the 5 anonymous reviewers and the editor-in-chief of Ethnoarchaeology for their meticulous and constructive comments and suggestions, and also Stelios Perdikis for granting us the permit to use visual material from some of these objects on display in the Kikos Monastery Museum. And of course, all of you for your attention and for attending our tonight's presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Athanasios and Giorgos, for this fascinating lecture. I must admit I am amazed by your work and that you jumped on this because it's a very short window. The Epitaphios is one day, so it's not as if this was on for a month during the. So it was you were very fast to find and identify this amazing new material. And congratulations to both. I'm sure people have questions. Please, if